Welcome, everyone. We are here today with Dr. Josef Witt-Doering, and I am honored to have him here on this channel. As you know, I make a lot of content based off of medications and different treatments for mental health, and Dr. Josef here is actually an expert in tapering. In fact, Dr. Josef Witt-Doering is a psychiatrist, and he's renowned for his expertise in the field of drug tapering and withdrawal management. With years of experience in clinical psychiatry, he has developed a particular interest and specialization in assisting patients with the safe and effective tapering of psychiatric medications. His approach is patient-centered, focusing on individualized plans that prioritize the patient's well-being and functioning. So welcome, Dr. Josef. How are you today?
I'm very well, thanks. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an honor. My clients here or customers, subscribers here at Level Headed Mind are used to medication videos and understanding how medications work, and maybe not so much about tapering off or getting off of medications, which isn't really down the line of conventional psychiatry. So how did you get into this line of work?
Yeah, it's a long story, and I'll give you like the major points. So heads up for the listeners here. I come at this from a probably a different perspective than you may have heard about from other psychiatrists. But when I entered the field, there are a few things that really bothered me with psychiatry, if I'm going to give you the real context. I don't like the idea that, at least in psychiatry, our diseases are not really diseases in the way that other medical conditions are diseases. And I don't mean that in a way that there's not immense suffering with psychiatric symptoms. I mean it that there's no real clear biological understanding. It always kind of bothered me that we defined things like depression with lists of symptoms that were quite arbitrary. And I also noticed that we were treating people with a lot of, we were mostly treating people with medications, and we were telling them that they had, I guess, diseases in a way. You've got this major depressive disorder, and we were always talking about it in this very biological way in terms of it was stemming from their brain. And I feel like we'd kind of strayed pretty far from our roots, at least with what I was seeing in my training. And while there's a lot of social reasons that people get depressed and unhappy, whether it's poverty and problems with jobs or problems within the home, and there's also, there are just simple, just very common things that people become unhappy about, like, problems, dysfunctional relationships, and all types of things. I felt like that was really getting erased because the way I was trained in many ways, not by what they said, but what I saw happening in front of me in my training, was that people would come in and they would say they're unhappy, and they would meet criteria for a disorder, and they get put on the medications, not because I think family medicine doctors and psychiatrists are nasty people and they just want to medicate things away, but because it was expedient and it was less resource intensive. And so I found myself kind of observing what I thought was a system that really wasn't designed to help people in the way that they deserve to be helped, where because it was expedient, we were diagnosing people based on like lists of symptoms and essentially just putting them on meds, and we really didn't have a well-developed infrastructure to help people with the real problems that they were experiencing. And so doctors really weren't getting to know their patients very well, and that really bothered me. And as I started looking into the downsides of that, I realized that a lot of the drugs, they have side effects that are pretty bad. And there were side effects we weren't telling people about. And I'm sure Giselle may ask me about some of these later, like protracted withdrawal, which is a type of neurological injury or damage that happens when people come off. There's issues like PSSD, which what I would say are very uncommon, but if they do happen to you, they're serious. PSSD is a form of persistent sexual dysfunction when you come off the meds. And then there were also other issues with the medications where some of the side effects of the drugs, they could actually make people worse in a way. I
Mhm.
days, I was also seeing doctors miss problems with the drugs. We would have people on 5 or 6 different medications, and they would be really blunted. And I'd be sitting there, and they'd be adding more and more medications, and I'd see this a lot, and I just go, "This person's not getting any better." And the doctors would commonly say, "Hey, this is just treatment-resistant depression." But then later on in my career, when I was taking people off these medications, they started to get better. And I realized that there's also an issue of just drug stacking going on, where we can actually make people pretty mentally ill by just the drug effects of these medications and miss them. I guess the narrative that's out there, that that there's all these terrible mental illnesses and brain diseases out there, and we really need to get everyone on these meds. I know it's not said like that, but sometimes it feels like that. That really wasn't meshing with what I was seeing, and in fact, I think a lot of people were oversold on how safe they were, and lots of people got on medications who really deserved support in other ways that were less risky. And probably the hardest thing about this, and what is eventually the answer to your question, Giselle, is
Mhm.
we were telling people that these meds were easy to come off. Well, maybe not easy. That the withdrawal would be mild and self-limited was the phrase that I heard a lot. That
Mhm.
there wasn't really a downside to getting off, and it was quite easy to unwind, and that may be true for some people, but for others, for reasons that we don't understand, it can be extremely difficult. And that group of people, I think, have been just dismissed, or their suffering coming off the withdrawal has been written off as their underlying condition, and they end up on medications that they were trying to stop, but now they get told that they need to be on them forever. And so that's a really long answer into kind of
Mhm.
my background and my train of thought as to how I ended up here. And yeah.
Yeah, so it sounds like it was a very patient driven, like your experience of seeing these patients suffering made you realize, like, wait a minute, like this isn't the patient's fault. This is actually the medications that are doing this. And so your eyes were opened in that type of way. And so you looked for an alternative approach to helping these people, which is very admirable. Most psychiatrists are stuck in this conventional, narrow way of thinking that medication is the only answer. And so I think that that's, very commendable of you to step outside of the box and really disrupt the norms here. And then there's several, people out there that are doing that, and I appreciate the work that is being done out there, because we are making a shift and we are changing the way that these medications are viewed. Now, do you believe that with this taper approach that everyone should be coming off of their psychotropic medications? Or when do you think is a good time to have the conversation? Or if there's a patient listening who's thinking, man, I'm on 5 or 6 medications, like, should I be tapering? What would you say to them? What's a good guide to let people know that maybe they should be tapering?
I think we have to think about, like, I guess why we're taking the medication to begin with, right? So in general, my stance is that the drug should be used for the least amount of time possible. And the reason I believe that is that there is some uncertainty about the long-term effects of these medications. And what I do see happen is someone will get on a medication and it'll work great at the start, maybe even for the first couple of years. But slowly over time, they become tolerant to it, and then they need higher and higher doses. And so this eventually leads to a situation where people tend to accumulate the medications, which is kind of digging a deep hole, because eventually you end up on a lot of meds, and you become tolerant to the drug effect. It doesn't happen to everyone, but I do see it happen frequently enough. So whenever I'm working with patients on medications, we're always thinking, well, is there anything else that we could be doing? And when you start asking that question, you need to, we're also thinking about, why is this person depressed? And so we also want to look at the person's life. I mean, the things that make people unhappy, I feel like we focus a lot on genetic issues, but there can also be real things going on in people's lives, whether it's challenges with their relationships, jobs that they don't like, and they can be supported to improve those things. And if we just but that doesn't mean necessarily that we can't have some mental health conditions that maybe are stemming from whether it's a biological thing or it's happening after a traumatic brain injury, or there's some genetic loading. And so it needs to just be informed by what are we trying to achieve with this medication, and are we confident that we've looked at all the other possibilities that are contributing to the symptoms? Because from my perspective, I mean, if you've been really vigilant about your mental health, and you've looked at your relationships and work, and you've got people helping you and there's therapists, and you get to the point where you say, well, I've done everything and I'm still feeling terrible. You've looked at diet as well, and you've ruled out other medical conditions. If you've done all of that and you're still suffering from mental illness, there's no issue to take medications. In fact, that's a good thing to do. Let's use the rewards of medical science. The people who I do think should be questioning medication usage are the ones who may have this sense, that they're legitimately wrong with the life and the way they're living, and something that they do need help with overcoming. Because in those situations, then addressing that issue it's going to be a much better thing to do. So that's for the person who's not having any side effects and such. But sometimes the issue is forced, all right? And even if you've tried multiple things and the drug is working for you, you start to develop a neurotoxicity or some severe reactions, and you need to come off. But yeah, I'll stop there. I mean, those are my thoughts on that issue.
Yeah. And so so basically when someone may be experiencing some negative side effects from it, or perhaps they're looking at their life and thinking, maybe, my depression was stemmed from this life circumstance that I really didn't get a chance to resolve in therapy or doing the work, so to speak, or like you briefly mentioned, diet and lifestyle. I believe those things are very important for people to look into, as well as, the DSM. I used to always think it was flawed. And then I was reminded that one of the areas in the DSM that gets ignored across the board is the ruling out of medical conditions. And so making sure that they're checking for those things, right? And making sure it's not hypothyroidism or hyperthyroidism and things of that nature, because that can really mimic psychiatric conditions and this anxiety symptomology or depression symptomology, and even nutrient deficiencies can do the same thing. So looking for root causes would definitely be good to make sure that you're taking care of those things. But certainly when you start stacking psychotropic medications one after another, you can end up with this type of neurotoxic state. And I see this a lot in patients in the benzo community, or the benzodiazepines, who are then trying to taper that. Is that something that you often see as well with the type of neurotoxicity that is seen out there with the patients on psychotropics? Is it more exacerbated in that group, or do you feel that it's kind of shared across the psychotropic medications? Well, neurotoxic kind of a state. So do you feel like that state is related to more of the patients with the benzodiazepines or antidepressants? Like, is there a hierarchy, so to speak, of these types of medications and creating this type of neurotoxic, burden on the patients?
Yeah. So when we're talking about medications, which I really see as having the potential to hurt people when they come off them, and by hurt, I mean developing a condition called protracted withdrawal, where if the person experiences severe withdrawal symptoms, that they can have lingering neurological problems afterwards. It does appear to happen much more frequently with certain drug types. And so it happens mostly with the benzodiazepines and the Z drugs, so like Ambien, Sonata and such. And it also happens with SSRIs, SNRIs, and mirtazapine. And so drugs which I don't see causing enduring withdrawal problems are antipsychotics, mood stabilizers, Wellbutrin, ADHD medications. And so what this means for me is a lot of caution is needed with the SSRIs, SNRIs, and benzos. I mean, all drugs should be tapered slowly because we don't want people going into severe withdrawal. But with the with that group of antidepressants and the benzodiazepines, I really believe a lot more caution is needed because once someone develops a protracted withdrawal issue, then that's life-changing.
Absolutely. It can be very debilitating. Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely agree. And the gabapentinoids would be considered in that same class as well. They similarly act on those receptors. So, like gabapentin and pregabalin or Lyrica. I have a couple patients who have been suffering from Lyrica withdrawal in a protracted state now.
Mhm.
And it's very difficult, but very similar to those benzos just because the way it works in the brain. And so
Mhm.
when patients get into this state of neurotoxicity, um, that's when we tend to get this pushback. You go to a conventional psychiatrist, they're going to say, just get back on the medication. You were doing so much better on this medication. Why not just go back to the medication? And oftentimes, then they start blaming the patient and the patient's mental illness. So, what do you say to these critics, in psychiatry who are saying that, the tapering is doing more harm and that these patients should just be on the medications for life? Like they think this is a sign that the person needs to stay on the medication.
I think it's reasonable to have that thought if it works, right? But with protracted withdrawal, when people go back on the medications, the symptoms don't go away. So you'll have a patient go into withdrawal, become very unwell, and then the doc says, well, could be your underlying mental condition. And yeah, they might be right because a lot of the protracted withdrawal symptoms are severe anxiety and panic, among other things. But if you put them back on the drug and then they don't get better, and on top of having the severe anxiety and panic all the time, they start to pace. They have ringing in their ears. They have light sensitivity. They start to develop neuropathy in their hands and feet. Then they start to suffer from a range of gastrointestinal problems, like IBS style symptoms with food sensitivities and diarrhea and constipation and such. We're looking at a different clinical entity. At that point, it's looking more like protracted withdrawal, which is recognized as an adverse reaction, at least by Royal College of Psychiatrists in the UK and with the benzodiazepines in the drug labeling at the FDA.
Mhm.
And so what I think the issue is a lot of the doctors don't actually recognize that it is an adverse drug reaction that's occurring, and you can't recognize what you haven't learnt about or seen. And I know for a lot of patients, they say, "Oh, this is crazy. These incompetent doctors. Why don't they know these things?" But I never learnt it when I went through school. Yeah, these were things that I learnt because I'm particularly interested in drug side effects, and at least with the benzos, protracted withdrawal in the US was only added to the labels in 2020. And so,
Yeah.
unless someone is sitting there reading these labels, they're not going to have the most up-to-date information. And so, these are well-meaning people trying to help their patients who have not been trained or informed about these things, and so they miss them.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely agree. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in the education space. And I would agree that as a psychiatric nurse practitioner, we're heavily trained in medications and psychopharmacology. And there was some, information about tapering, but it was going by stalls, basically. And he most of his stuff will say cut by half for a couple weeks, cut by half, that approach, which we know can be very dangerous. And so yeah, we certainly need more education in our space because I do believe that other providers are, you know, doing what they were taught, and believing what they were taught, which a lot of the education, I believe one of your videos you mentioned this, how the education that we receive is actually driven by pharma, big pharma, and their agenda is obviously medication driven. So we have to hopefully break that. I think that's where a lot of the work will need to be done in this space, is in the education space, and getting those practitioners educated on this, which I believe we're starting to head that direction.
Yeah,
So
I
yeah.
want to pick up on that point because I think it's interesting. I do think there's a couple things that maybe in psychiatry make us slower to recognize problems with the drugs. And the first one is obvious. I mean, the pharmaceutical industry, they have a incentive to make doctors see the drug in the most positive light. And so when there can be an interpretation or a slant on an issue, it is going to slant towards, hey, this is not as big of a problem as you think, because they don't want doctors to be so worried about their drug that they're going to pick a competitor drug. And so they have an incentive to do everything they possibly can to kind of make doctors see it in the best possible light without saying anything illegal. And I know that because I've worked for a couple pharmaceutical companies, and I've been in those meetings, and that's just commerce. But the other thing is, psychiatry as a field is particularly defensive about medications, and this has a long history, and unlike other medical specialties where you could have bacterial problems, and you can look at them under a microscope and give a medication to make it go away. The psychiatric illnesses are the psychiatric problems are a lot more complicated. And we've had people attack the field in the past. I mean, there was a guy called Thomas Sass who was saying quite effectively, so I think in the 70s, that a lot of mental illness is not actually brain problems the way we're telling people. It's actually people who are responding to a sick society. And while I do believe some mental illnesses can come from the brain, I believe the majority of them, the vast majority of mental illnesses, do actually come from things in the world. And that was really threatening to the field, when people were saying these aren't real illnesses. You guys are acting more like police, in fact, and people who are taking away inconvenient people, or people who are unhappy about illegitimate things. You're medicalizing them and putting them on meds. And so we've had this ongoing kind of attack against the legitimacy of what psychiatrists are doing. And it's made people defensive. It's made people double down, at least within psychiatry, to say, no, these are real medical conditions, and the drugs, they work. Don't criticize the drugs. You're stigmatizing people. And I actually think it's biased people to the point where rather than being objective about psychiatric interventions, they're trying to advocate for them, which has a bias there. They're trying to say, we need to advance this notion that these medications are safe and mental illness is real all the time. And I think it comes from a place of defensiveness against some criticism, which is valid. And so, yeah, I do believe as a profession, we are more hesitant to really look at some of these more uncomfortable issues about the medications.
Absolutely. Totally agree. And when it comes to this criticism, a lot of providers will say, with the tapering, slow taper is just maybe a couple of months. But, in reality, that can be dangerous. So when you're looking at someone that's on several medications, what do you consider to be a safe taper or slow taper? Like, how should they start? Should they just go along with their psychiatrist and start cutting by half? And
Sure. Yeah. What I will say is, and the thing that makes this difficult, is that there's a lot of variability in what people can tolerate in terms of tapers. I've seen some people be on these drugs for 5 years and come off in a couple of months without much issue. But for whatever reason, the brain is plastic to a point where when you remove the drug, it was rapidly able to readapt to its absence and stabilize the person. That's it. I've seen some people take these medications for 6 months and have a hell of a time coming off. When they start to remove the drug, they have a lot of symptoms. And so the first thing is that there are variables which we can't identify in advance that may make someone have a more challenging taper. And so the real rule, I mean, the principal rule is move as fast as you can handle. Because the goal is to get someone off without disabling withdrawal symptoms. Because you don't want to do this sort of hope and pray thing where you say, okay, they're going to be really disabling and I'm just going to grit my teeth and bear it for 2 weeks and hope that they pass. I mean, that can be dangerous and it can be harmful. And so, I mean, in general, you kind of want to, if someone has been on for like 3 months, I think you get them off in probably like, I don't know, 6 weeks or something like that, maybe even less. If they've been on them for 6 months, maybe your tape is going to be 3 months, something like that. But once you cross the year mark, once your brain has really adapted to it, we switch over to tapering people between 5 to 10% a month. And then that's at least the initiation. So you might do a 10% reduction the first month. And if you do well with that reduction, you could say, well, maybe I'm going to try 15. You can bump it up. And if you do well with that reduction, then you'd say, I'm going to stay here for a little bit and just go down at that rate. But eventually you're going to hit a point where you have symptoms and then you need to scale it back. And so, okay, 15 was too much now. Now it's back to 10. You might do that for a few more months. Ooh, that, I felt that. And then you would go down to 5 and so on. So you always, the main rule is that you just want to listen to your body and only move at the level that you can tolerate. And when you do that, most people, even if they've been on the drugs for, 5 years, 10 years, they can get off between maybe a year and a half to 2 years, sometimes a little bit more if they're moving at a pace. Sometimes it's longer, sometimes it's shorter, but that's generally what I see.
Yeah, I agree. And the thing with honoring your body and listening to what your body is showing you within, these symptoms of withdrawal can get clouded for people. And I think that that's where the need for a practitioner who can be objective in these things comes into play. I'm not sure if you noticed that, but when I see patients that are coming off of medications, they get super hyper focused on every little symptom. And sometimes that drives fear and they have a hard time seeing the big picture from when they started to where they are now. And so we got to look at things more objectively and start focusing on cluster symptoms. Do you have the same experience with patients when you're tapering them, where they get hyper focused and then it's hard for them to see, the forest through the trees, so to speak?
Yeah, I do. And what I will say is tapering people off psychiatric medications is incredibly difficult and it's really time consuming. Because we're effectively putting people in many cases into high anxiety states because that's what drug withdrawal is. We are in a safe way putting someone into a high state of withdrawal that their brain can readapt to. And when you do that, they're understandably going to be very panicked about things. And not only that is we're also starting to deal with some of the original problems that led to someone being on the medications before. And so I think that the easy stuff with drug withdrawal is actually just like the math and the tapering and the doing all of that. The labor intensive stuff is just the reassurance because you need to use all those non-drug skills that you have of giving people hope and sitting with them in intense uncomfortable states that make you feel weird because, well, weird's not the right word. When you're with someone who's really suffering and they're high anxiety and they're in a panic, this energy is it projects onto you and it is uncomfortable and you need to fight against trying to get away, or like get on the medications, and you need to walk into it and sit with them. Yeah. And you need to step into their state of mind and just be like, this must be terrifying, what's going on. And that's why I think a lot of people can't do this work, because you have to be really comfortable with people who are full on in a panic. Sometimes they're feeling really depressed, they're feeling really hopeless. They have no other choice but to come off. And you need to be not afraid of it. And you have to be able
Yeah.
to sit with them. And if you just do that long enough, they get better. But it's really time intensive. And you have to be available. At least I find sometimes you have to be available quite a lot. You know, if someone is having a difficulty, you may drop what you're doing and see them that night or the next day. And so it's not like treating something like some dermatologic procedure, you know, that could wait a couple of weeks. These people need help right now, and then they will ask for it. And so, yeah, I mean, that's my take on it. I never think that I don't ever think that tapering is going to be a mainstream thing that people are going to enjoy doing, because it's just so it's just so time intensive. And
Yeah.
once you have a few of these patients, you'll either love it because you're passionate about it, or
Mhm.
you'll kind of become
Burn
quite
out.
frightened. Yeah,
Yeah, you burn
yeah.
out very quickly.
Hmm.
Yeah, I learned that. I learned that the hard way, how
Hmm.
difficult it is and how time consuming it is, which unfortunately is why a lot of practitioners who go down this road of helping people come off of medications are outside of insurance, because there's no way insurance is going to cover or pay, for an hour-long session for medication management. They don't understand, and there's no amount of codes that you could do to really value the work that you're doing, not only in that hour session, but outside of that session. Like you mentioned, the messages that come through, the constant reassurance that, oh, let me set up another emergency session here. I can squeeze you in on Friday, or I could squeeze you in here, to help with that extra support that they need. And so yeah, absolutely. A lot of providers like yourself and others are outside of this insurance model. And so that brings me to ask, with your tapering clinic specifically, what sets you apart from other providers who may say, yeah, we can taper you, or we'll do a taper for you. What really sets you apart from the mainstream, or even other practitioners who are doing similar things? It sounds like you have more of a team approach.
Yeah, what sets us apart is, I guess we really focus on the problem. I mean, you know, I haven't had a horrific drug withdrawal, but a lot of the people that I work with have. And so a lot of what we do is homegrown by people who have gone through it and they know what is needed. Um, I mean, my program is far from perfect, but every single day we sit down and we think about how can we do it better? How can we provide better training, and really make this the best possible experience for someone going through something as dreadful as psychiatric drug withdrawal. So in that sense, I mean, we do try and be available for people every day. And so because we know that there's so much intense fear and high anxiety during this, I mean, we do groups Monday through Friday. We have several group meetings where people could drop in for reassurance and for questions. People have these constant questions about their taper. You know, should I do this? Should I do that? And it's driven from this neurological fear, and also fear about their situation, which is just valid because some people are quite disabled. And so
Yeah.
we just make sure that we're there for them. And we have people, and so we've had to do our staffing in a way where we can, afford to have people there every day, Monday through Friday, to meet with people just in drop-ins. And so I'd probably say that part of it, really knowing the condition and knowing what the people need,
Mhm.
is sets us apart. I mean, we know the drugs, we know how to taper, but there's a whole book out there, Mark Horowitz's
Yeah.
deprescribing guidelines. The information is out there, but it's really the fact that we try and build a program around the people and the problem, rather than trying to fit it to maybe a more conventional psychiatric setting where someone calls and it's an emergency and it's like, oh, the doctor will see you in 2 weeks.
Mm.
That doesn't really quite cut it with this, because what I do see is people panic and then they make changes to their meds and they hurt themselves because they're in such fear. So we're trying to build it around the problem.
Mhm.
That's what I think makes us different.
Yeah, I think that's great. The team approach and making it around the patient as far as, understanding their needs. It sounds like you really have a grasp of the needs of patients who are tapering, because their needs are certainly more fear driven, more heightened. And I often think that, unfortunately, though, there are other support groups and forums out there, that when patients are in these types of forums, they're hearing a lot of negativity. They're gathering a lot of information or research about this, that, and the other. And then they come back to you with, oh, but I saw this person was doing it 5% and they got sick, and they, what if that's going to happen to me? Or I saw someone had to go up and this happened to them. And so it's driven by that. And it sounds like you're creating this space for them to come and ask questions of professionals, and not just blindly have to go into a forum where, who knows what kind of information they're going to get there. So it's more driven by the practitioner, which I think is great.
Yeah. And a few more things on that, that now that you're asking about this, and this is why it's important, I think, also to see medical professionals, because sometimes people think that they're having withdrawal problems, but there's other issues. There's medical issues. Sometimes there's issues with drugs that they're not withdrawing. I see people trying to come off benzodiazepines while they're taking stimulants, and it's like it's never going to happen. There is a certain sequence of things to how you do this that can make it a lot more comfortable and a lot smoother. And if you go into a forum, people don't know your full medical history. They don't know all the drugs that you're on and the doses and the time course of it, and your different conditions. And all of that is really important to strategically taking people off the medications. So this is that one side of it, which is why it's important to see a medical practitioner, like myself or like yourself, Giselle, and then also to be with someone that has the experience of working with people where they can provide reassurance. Because if you go on the forum, sometimes it just feels like, oh my God, we're all going to die, because it's just so, like, it's just all of the people there are the ones who are still unwell because the healthy ones have moved on.
Mhm.
And you need people to just say, hey, I've helped a whole bunch of people with this and they're better now, they're moving on with their lives, and people need to hear that hope. And I mean, this is one thing that I haven't done well, but I need to do well on our YouTube channel, is just grab all of the recovery stories from the people that I've interviewed. I interview people recovering from drug withdrawal,
Mhm.
and some people in the midst of it, but to get a
Yeah.
list of the people who have recovered and make a playlist of that, because
Yeah.
people latch onto those things for hope, because it can be so dark when you're there.
Absolutely. And
Hmm.
that's the fear of tapering, that all, patients and practitioners have is, will my patient, suffer to a point where, they decide to end their life? That is a reality. Obviously, it's a reality when someone's going through severe depression, etc. But more so when they're suffering through withdrawal and they feel like there's no hope, or they're going to these places and getting negative comments and feedback. So it's important to be supported in a positive way, and that's what I like to, get my clients and looking at. Hey, try going to places where you're going to get positive feedback. Let's start talking to people, friends, family, and find a support group that's going to support you in that way positively, and not all negative, because that can be very triggering for someone who's going through, the depths of withdrawal, or if they're in protracted state. Obviously that makes it difficult for them. And so having this team approach, this drop-in approach that you offer, it sounds like you're really hitting, that area. And so I think that's really amazing that you're offering that, because I know for myself as a single practitioner trying to do this on my own kind of a thing, that's where I feel like I lack. I don't have the time to just drop everything and yeah, let me see you. Like, yeah, sure, and it's also very draining as well. And like you mentioned, the transference and counter transference that can happen within session can be overwhelming, for a practitioner as well. So doing your approach, using other practitioners who've been through it, and I believe you have coaches as well. When I was looking at your program, that also help
Mhm.
to integrate this process, so that way the patient is being supported by a group of people, so that it's also supporting you as a practitioner. You're not the only one, having to take the burden of all of what's going on with your patient. So I think that's amazing. And like I mentioned before, insurance doesn't cover it, so there is a cost to it, and it can, be costly to have some type of group, this type of setting where you're supported by multiple individuals, right? You have to pay multiple individuals to work around the clock and to do all the things that they're doing. So, of course, that comes with the price. Now, because insurance doesn't typically recognize this kind of work, or maybe if they do out of network, they may not get much back. Do you ever offer payment plans for patients to help make it affordable for them, or do you work with patients in that way, as far as that's concerned?
Personally, I don't do any payment plans. And I hate to say it like this, but well, actually, no, I don't. And this is totally okay, really. It's
Mhm.
we are in a development phase at the moment. The way I see it is we are developing almost a new medical specialty at the moment. And at least because of that, with my practice, our fees are high. Now, I don't think they're high in relation to the problem that we're solving. In fact, I think it's great value because people who are having this problem it's a serious problem. This is not a little problem. This is a problem that has people essentially disabled.
Yeah.
But it isn't something that you're going to use your insurance for. And uh, because of that, I mean, so much of our time is spent doing development. I mean, we're building training curriculums to train new staff on how to do this because it cannot be something that I simply handhold everyone and train them on how to do. So we're building infrastructure, we're training people how to run the groups, how to diagnose the patients, how to taper them, how to recognize all the things going on. And there will be a time where when it will be a lot more accessible and when the price will come down because we will have gotten to a point where it's not just hinging on one person, who's torn in a lot of different directions to do things. It's going to be really accessible, and I mean, we'll probably throw it up all on YouTube, all of the ways that we look at the problems and how we want to train them, because we want everyone to be able to do this. I mean, and people say, why put all of the ideas out on YouTube and such like that? But it's like this work is so challenging. I really don't think there's going to be people lining up to do this work, even if we share everything. I mean, we're going to do it because it's the right thing to do. But
Yeah.
um, you've got to love drug tapering to do it because man, oh man, is it challenging? But long story short, right now it's small. It's a boutique practice.
Mhm.
We don't do payment plans or anything like that, and so much of what we're doing is just product development. We are
Mhm.
trying to make the best product that we could teach others how to do at the moment.
Yeah. There's
Mm.
also ways to create like a payment through like a PayPal or something like that, where you still get the payment, but the patient can use PayPal pay later as an option.
Mm.
So there are other ways to kind of go around it, in that
Mhm.
regards, because I understand the risk you take with that as well. The financial risk of doing a payment plan yourself. But if you use other sources, that could be something to
Mhm.
offer in the
For
future.
sure.
But
Mhm.
yeah, I understand completely, being in this space, the time, because I think one thing that patients may not understand, and I think that you understand it 100%, is that what you're seeing in the price that Dr. Joseph's clinic is set up at, you may think, oh, sticker shock, that's too much, whatever. However, everything that you're getting is not just what he's offering that you get one-on-one in the actual sessions, the groups, all the coaches, etc. It's the time that he's putting in outside of the session. You see, practitioners have to prepare to do this kind of work to help you with tapering. They have to look at your labs if they're doing labs, do an analysis, figure out everything, every little piece of the puzzle. And a lot of that is done outside of session so they can prepare to see you and then directly and ask certain questions to bring about like what exactly is going on underneath the hood, so to speak, in your specific individualized situation. And so I believe that when clients and patients are looking at that, to think of the value you're getting, not just the fact that you can, which is amazing, that you can say, hey, I need to drop in to one of these groups that you're offering Monday through Friday, ask questions, but also the fact that all the work that you're putting in underneath to build this program to make it individual for them, I think is hands down, like that is what good care is all about. It's about the work the provider is doing behind the scenes to help support their patients and their clients. And that's something that a lot of people don't factor in. They're just looking at that 1 hour time frame or more. Sometimes it goes over, right? That they're with the provider, but then forget that, hey, when we hang up, when we're finished with you, we're now creating your plan. We're doing all of these things, and that's all offline. That's off, a call. And so there's a lot of work that goes into what you do, what I do, and other practitioners do. And so I think that it's well deserved.
Well, thank you. And I have conversations with people because there is sticker shock sometimes, and it's just like, well, I usually see my doctor and I pay a $50 copay, and why is it like this? And the question is, how invested is that doctor in helping you?
Bingo.
Did you really get to where you wanted to go using this method? And because the truth is that I don't think we've really, with the insurance model, it's churn and burn. A lot of the doctors are incentivized to see people really quickly, and it's not incentivized to get you the result. It's incentivized to, how do I care for you within 20 minutes? And I know some people go above and beyond, and they're great. But in general, I think most people would relate to an experience where it does feel like in and out. And if you have a complicated problem, you want someone invested with you. When people work with me, when they sign up to my program, I mean, we are massively investing in helping them. I mean, they're paying us to do that, and so we really turn up for them and ensure we get them the result, because that's what's different about us. Yeah, I mean, the way I like to think about it is, if you come to me, we're here for the result. It's not just seeing you in a visit. It's like, we're going to get you off the drugs and get you well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's not just that quick exchange that happens with the turn and burn. It's like a conveyor belt of psychiatry, and I understand that all too well, having worked in community mental health before kind of veering off on my own. And yeah, you can't get anything done, productively. You're just switching medications real quick. Well, let me try this, let me try that, throwing other things, adding to the deck, and creating
I've done it
chemical
too.
lobotomy. That's what I say. You end up treatment resistant. No, you created a chemical lobotomy for this person. It's awful. But yeah, I'm glad that you have your clinic, that you're invested in what you do, that you're creating these systems to make it even better. And I do appreciate the fact that you do provide the education you do on your channel, because it helps practitioners like me and other practitioners who feel like maybe they're alone in this whole space, to help guide us into, maybe we're stuck on someone who's protracted, or kind of give us some tips to help them through their taper. So I appreciate what you do. And
It's it's
Mhm.
only going to get better. We're putting together a full-on provider training at the moment, which we're going to
Oh,
post. And so really kind of
amazing.
drilling into the whole process of it. And so in the next 3 months, something a lot more robust for people all over the world to use. It's aimed at prescribers and how to help people with protracted withdrawal injuries and other tapering. So
That's
that's what we're
amazing.
doing in the background, and we love it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it
Yeah.
shows in your videos, very quality, you use your humor and some of them but I love it.
Hmm.
It's very, very good in all
Hmm.
that you do. So I'm excited to be able to, you know, watch these videos in the future and look forward to it. Now, when it comes
Hmm.
to patients who want to work with you, how can they reach you? Website or?
Hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah, so it just comes to the website, taperclinic.com. That's I have an accent, so I'm going to spell it out. That's TAPERCLINIC.com. Taper Clinic, one word. And if you go on the homepage, just click I think it's a red button that says learn about the program. You'll watch a video that discusses our tapering philosophy. And if that meshes with you, you'll be given an option to book a call with me.
Wonderful.
Hmm.
Yeah. And
Hmm.
so you're also at the Taper Clinic on YouTube. So
Hmm.
you have a following there and also, I believe, Instagram. Is that also at the Taper Clinic, TikTok?
Yep, yep. So
And
we're across all platforms,
okay.
TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I
Okay.
think we're on Threads as well,
Okay.
and so it's either going to be Taper Clinic or Dr. Josef. That's German spelling, Josef.
Okay.
And yeah, we're there talking about psychiatric drugs and tapering issues.
Wonderful. And I'll make
Mm.
sure to link all of that down in the description below for all of you. So that way you can go ahead and click on those links and learn more about Dr. Joseph. And also, if you want to work with him, feel free, to go to that website.
Thank you for having me on and being so kind about the things that you've said about what we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I'm honored to
Hmm.
have you here, and I want everyone to learn what's out there and to get more information about tapering from an actual doctor, a psychiatrist, from a source that is, very well educated and resourced and researched in this field and actually working in the field. I think that's very, very important. So make sure to check out those links, and I thank you all for being here as always. I wish you well on your mental health care journey and look forward to seeing you all next week.